Suddenly you're older, and all because of the man that got away. No more his eager call, the writings on the wall, the dreams you've dreamed have all gone astray. The man that won you has run off and undone you. That great beginning has seen the final inning. Don't know what happened. It's all a crazy game. No more that all-time thrill, for you've been through the mill, and never a new love will be the same. Good riddance, goodbye. Every trick of his, you're on to. But fools will be fools. And where's he gone to? The road gets rougher, it's lonelier and tougher. With hope you burn up, tomorrow he may turn up. There's just no let up. They'll live a long night and day. Ever since this world began, there is nothing sadder than a one-man woman looking for the man that got away. The man that got
Welcome to DSM's Black Art Matter series. We're here today with Sky Williams, who is a Dallas-based actress and who has been seen on many a DFW stages. Welcome, Sky.
Hey, babes. How you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you doing today?
You know what? All things considered, I'm doing pretty well.
Same. So we're going to jump right in here with the first question that we always start with, and that is, the series is called Black Art Matters. So we would love to know, what does Black identity mean for and to you?
Black identity to me means owning up to what you've been through, where you've come from, where you are currently, and where you're headed. And all of those things are connected, and all of those things influence each other. And when you embrace that and you don't fight it and you stand on it and you have conviction about it and accountability about it, you're indestructible.
Love that answer. Can you expand a little bit on the kind of acknowledgement of all of that, and what was that process for you? What does it look like for you to acknowledge that? And then when did you realize it happened?
I think, I can't speak for everybody, but I think for me, there comes a point where you have to go, oh yes, I'm Black. Not necessarily because you grow up thinking that you're a different race or anything like that, but it's just not something that really dawns on you, especially if you're surrounded by other Black people. Like, I grew up in California and went to a predominantly Black school. And then when I moved to Texas when I was about 12 years old, it was like, it kind of got shut into my face because I went to a school that was predominantly white. And I was like, this is where all the white people have been. But it was one of those things. And they were like, oh, you're Black. Your friends must be over there. And I was just like, oh, well, it never really dawned on me. And so over the years, I kind of had to learn about my culture or understand the differences from where I was and really kind of embrace that and take ownership of that. I think we can get maybe kind of lazy. Not lazy. I feel like lazy is the wrong word, but we get kind of
complacent almost?
Complacent, exactly. We can get very complacent in ourselves. And it's great to feel comfortable in your Blackness. But I think at some point you have to go, I come from hardy stock. I come from this legacy, this lineage of all of these things, whether it's, culture or traditions or whatever. And that is what got me here right now. And I have a great responsibility to continue on that legacy. And that does not necessarily mean I have to follow in the footsteps and I have to do all the things that Black people are supposed to do.
Right.
But there is a great responsibility in knowing where you came from, especially when it's not taught to you in school.
Right.
And especially when it's not something that other people outside of your family are expecting you to or want you to be proud of.
Right. So I want to expand a little bit on that move from California to Texas and ask, in California, were you comfortable with your Blackness? And then when you moved to Texas, were you uncomfortable with it and have to learn to be re-comfortable with it? Or what was that journey like for you?
You know what? I'm so sorry to cut you off.
No, please.
That's a good question because I moved to Texas from California right at puberty. So everything was feeling very, very weird. And so it's like, oh, what are boobs? And now I'm Black too? What's happening? But yes, I would say, yes, I did know that I was Black, but it wasn't something that was different because my neighbors were Black. But to be honest with you, the school that I went to, there was one Hispanic kid and one Asian kid and one kid that was from Germany, and they all kind of flocked to me.
Right.
Which happened again when I moved to Texas. I was friends with all of the international students. But yeah, it was one of those things that when I moved, it was such a huge shift. And it wasn't pleasant. It wasn't oh yeah, I'm different here. Look how cool it could be. And I can be friends with all the Black people. It was one of those things where I realized oh, okay, I wasn't really Black enough for the Black people and I wasn't, and I was too Black for the white people. So I had to find my own identity in that kind of crisis whilst also learning how to coming into my own as a woman.
Yeah.
And that puts a lot of pressure on a kiddo, but I take everything in stride.
How did that affect your creativity, that move? And that sounds like a pretty traumatic
It was. I
moment.
definitely came here kicking and screaming. I did not want to move to Texas, but it had nothing to do with white people. I thought that I was going to have to learn how to ride a horse. We didn't have cable. We weren't the most well-off family, but I was I don't know how to ride a horse. How do you milk a cow? They don't teach me these things in California. And then I moved here and I was what buildings? Where did these come from? Does everybody else know? Yeah. So, yes, does that answer your question?
It does. And I'm also wondering, I'm going to go ahead and say you're pretty established in this business and in this town. I have heard nothing but positive things. I've worked with you myself, and it's been always a great experience. Your choices to go out on certain auditions or certain casting calls, do you think, influenced by your Black identity?
Yes. And just my personal identity. I kind of grew up being the Black sheep of the family. I kind of grew up, like I said, when I grew up in the all-Black school, I was kind of weird, and I didn't have that many friends. And so I guess I kind of got I got comfortable with being uncomfortable. I got comfortable with being out of place, and I kind of used that to my advantage. Now, it took a while. it took a while to get comfortable with that. It took a while to go, okay, you're not like all the other Black girls. And there's a whole bunch of negative stuff attached to that that I have learned about. But yeah, the auditions that I do go out for, it's one of those things where if I can connect to a character, regardless of their race, I'm going to go out for it. And I think I got spoiled, which is unfortunate to say that this is what spoiling is the community college that I went to Collin County Community College, and got cast a lot in things that were technically colorblind casting. One of my shows, my husband was played by a white guy, and our daughter was Latina. And, you know, but that was right at the beginning of me doing theater. And I'd started doing theater very much later than a lot of people did. I started when I was like 17, and I was doing this show when I was like 19. And so to me, it was just like, oh, yeah, this is what happens. Sometimes if you're just good for the role, or if, you know, the director likes you enough, or if you have a good enough rapport, you're going to get cast in whatever. And it doesn't matter about race. And I learned later on when I went to school in East Texas that it wasn't necessarily like that. So I got spoiled earlier on, and I'm thankful for that, because when I did get my bachelor's and I came back to Dallas to start auditioning again, yes, I was a little bit discouraged because of what happened when I went to go get my bachelor's. But when I came back, I was like, you know, I got those other roles when I thought that I sucked. What's going to happen if I just go out there and try for things? And it's one of those things, and I have gone to auditions before where I will show up and I'm the only Black woman there, and like there's just a bunch of gorgeous white girls, and they're kind of looking at you like, "What are you doing here?" And I'm just like, "I don't know.
Here,
like, I'm here the same as you." And I think when you go in there with that attitude, not like apologizing for being in the room, and that's a big thing that I like to tell my friends and myself every single day is like, do not apologize, because they can see it on your face and they can see it in your body. When you walk in the room, don't necessarily say, "Oh, well, you're welcome," but walk in and be like, "I've got something that you want."
Yeah.
And if you don't pick it, that's fine. Somebody else will. So, yeah.
I love that. Thank you for sharing that. I want to kind of switch gears here almost on a 180.
Let's do it.
And talk about intersectionality of identity, because this past year you actually came out as lesbian.
I did.
So on top of all the uncomfortableness that you have felt coming into your Black identity, there's now this also coming into your lesbian identity. Can you talk about what that process has been like, and if it's been compounded, or if they're two separate things in your mind? What does that look like for you?
That is a really, really great question. It's different, because when I walk outside, people see a Black woman. But I have to tell people that I'm a lesbian. And I don't necessarily do that because, A, it's not really any other business. Not that I'm ashamed of it, but it's just one of those things where it is a part of me, and it is me. I live in this every single day. And, yeah, I think the process of becoming a lesbian, realizing that I was a lesbian was interesting, because once I realized it, I was so immediately like, okay, this is what I am. And I have so many friends who have been like, oh, well, I've known for years, and it took me all this time to come out, even after I figured it out. And because I have am who I am. I've always been Black. I've always been a woman. I've always been theater tall. When I walk into the room, people are going to have problems with me. When I live in this world, people have problems with me, point blank, period, without me even saying anything. Just me existing is a problem. So, I mean, you add on queer to that, and it's just like, oh my gosh, that's just another problem. I'm just like, I've made it this far without really taking to heart the hatred or the ignorance that other people try to make my problem. So, yeah, I would say, I think realizing that I was a lesbian, I was able to come to terms with it because of what I've been through.
Right.
Because I've been hated for things that I cannot change and things that are very, very visible. Yeah.
And with the intersectionality now of those two identities, has that changed your creative outlook on the type of art you want to create or the type of art you want to pursue?
That is a really good question. Yes, because I've been watching a lot of lesbian movies and that it's not great. So I was like joking with a friend of mine. I was like, the L word. And she's like, yeah, it's not that awesome. And I was like, I think I could write something better. I haven't been here long, but I think I can write something better. And so it's just kind of this thing is now I can write about it. And so I have permission to, whereas, you have a lot of, like when you have a lot of, like, white playwrights writing Black plays, writing the Black experience. And you're like, how do you get to do that from just observing?
Right.
That's fine. I don't know if that's really how it should be done. And so it's one of those things where it's like, oh, now I can write from a totally new perspective. And what a thrill that is. No, but it really, really is. And I consider it kind of a blessing and just kind of a wonderful thing that I get to do.
Thank you for sharing that. I want to ask a very specific question, and that is, in any production you have been in, have there been moments of blatant racism, or not even blatant, unovert racism that you have faced? And how did that affect you, and how did you deal with that? And was there a support system in place for you to help you deal with that?
Absolutely. I dare you to find a single Black person in this community that hasn't. Yes. And microaggressions are things that we deal with on a day-to-day basis. And a lot of times I will chalk it up to people just being ignorant. They just don't know. And I have to give people on the outside of us a lot of grace. And I think that comes from the job that I have. My 9 to 5 is, I'm a nanny during the day. And so I've worked with lots of families, and I get to see these kids grow up in a way that I'm like, now, why would you know not to say that? Why would you know? And, even with their parents, I'm just like, okay, well, yeah, all of your friends are white. How would you not know not to say these words to me?
Right.
And so I take those opportunities to educate, which can be exhausting, but necessary evil. So I try to pick my battles when it happens in the theater, because that's supposed to be our safe space, isn't it? And sometimes it's not. And when we learn that it's not, that can be very disheartening. I think, and this is why I believe it's very, very important for theaters to not only hire Black actors, Black performers, but to have Black people on staff, to have people of color on staff. Because when these atrocities happen, when these moments happen, it could be something very, very small, but it can trigger something very, very big. And when the most recent one that I can think of, when that happened, I felt panicked because everyone around me was white. I was the only Black person in the cast. Director was white, the staff was white, and it's like, where do I turn to? And thank God there was somebody on staff, somebody who was in that space and could talk to people and had authority and had, I would say, could be a really good liaison in this circumstance. Thank God there was somebody there that was a person of color that I can be like, hey, I usually don't say something, but I have to.
Right.
And it really allowed me to see how necessary that is, because if everybody else, and that's happened so many times where it's everybody around me is white, it's one of those things you're like, okay, I'm going to have to grin and bear it, because if I say something, I'm going to seem ungrateful. And, looking back on it, it's one of those things that's like, okay, so I signed my contract. What do they think? Who cares if they think that I'm ungrateful? Like, I was listening to, I don't know, podcast or something on YouTube, Facebook, something like that. And I read something, it was saying that, like, all of your life, you're going to come up with these things that are either going to make you uncomfortable or make the other person uncomfortable. And if you keep sacrificing yourself, you're going to get used to that. And you're just going to continue to allow people to live in their ignorance, live in their truth, their little bubble, while you have to stick with, suffering.
Right.
And so you have to make that decision. Like, I am not going to risk being uncomfortable so that you can stay ignorant.
Right.
I'm going to say something so that you can be educated. Now, if that makes you uncomfortable, if you don't like that, that's your issue now. I've done my job.
Right.
And I would wish other people would do the same with me, not even just with race, with anything. It's like, say something. For the love of God, say something. I know it's terrifying. And it's even more terrifying when you don't have anybody around you who would understand.
I think that story you shared really underscores the absolute need for people on the other side of the table to be people of color.
Absolutely.
In order to help actors and actresses and performers deal with these microaggressions and blatant acts of racism. Why do you think we have such a problem doing that as a sector, but honestly, specifically in Dallas?
We are still in the South. And yes, Dallas is, a wonderful melting pot, and we're still growing. But I think progress is so very slow, especially when it gets so much pushback. And I think people think, hey, as long as we're hiring Black actors, we're the good guys. We're doing everything right. But people need to understand that the theater is should be a reflection of the community, not its patrons. And that does not just mean on the stage. That means behind the scenes. That means on the board. That means, people who are working in box office. Representation is so very important. And I think we're getting there. I think especially recently during the Black Lives Matter movement has really gained momentum, and thank God for that. And a lot of theaters are going, okay, there is something that we need to do. But then there are a lot of theaters saying like, what? Like, we're the theater. We're the good guys. Okay, just saying that you're the theater, just that word does not make you, it still makes you culpable of what's going on in our world.
Yep.
And I'm very, very thankful for the theaters that are making movement and having these conversations and really, really doing the work and not just saying, we support you or you can come on in.
Right.
It's like, we want you to be a part of our family. I don't know why it's so hard. I hate that it is, and I don't know why it is.
Yeah. So you mentioned before we started filming that you've had a lot of these conversations in regards to race and what's going on right now. Do you think those conversations have yielded results? Do you think they will yield results? And even in this conversation we're having now, with my organization at Dallas Summer Musicals, we're having this conversation, but is it going to yield results? What are your thoughts on that?
I can't predict the future, but yeah, conversations are being had, and God bless for that. And like I said, progress is really, really slow. There is an optimistic side of me that she won't stop believing that change is happening. And I have seen it. I will say that. I have seen it because not only have my friends been reaching out to me, but theaters have been reaching out to me and saying like, hey, can you talk about this? And yes, that can be very, very exhausting because sometimes it's like, hey, can you relive your trauma so that I can understand your humanity?
Over and over again.
And you're like, oh my gosh, would you research? But as long as they're listening, I'm going to talk.
Yeah.
But it's not just hearing us. And I think that's really what we need to make sure that people do, is not just putting up a Black Lives Matter banner and saying like, well, we talked to this Black person and, this other Black person says we're doing okay. It's not just about that.
Right.
We need to be in spaces where we're not just displayed. We need to be seen. We need to be felt. We need to be understood. We need to be experienced. that is what we want. And until that happens, we still have a lot of work to do.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And because I think you're 100% right. And I really hope those who are watching this take that in full stride and run with it and create action from this conversation, including myself and including our team
Right.
at DSM. There's kind of one final question I want to wrap us up here on.
Hit me with it.
And that is going back to everything you have said. You show so much bravery and grace in the way you stand up and speak for not only yourself, but for the communities in which you are a part of. What advice do you have to those who are part of those same communities to be able to showcase and bring out that same bravery and same courage?
First of all, thank you. Thank you very much. What a wonderful compliment. We all have our strengths. And I think it's very, very important for everybody to find their strength and apply it to this. I believe wonderful, my wonderful friend Cher said, like, find your light and help the plight. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's brilliant.
Way to tie back to theater there too.
Yeah, I mean, it applies to like everything. But yeah, especially to the theater, because a lot of people are just like, I want to help, but I'm not a speaker. Yeah. And, I get, and I'm just like, there are so many ways that you can help this process. The point is to never give up and don't stop. Whatever it is that you're going to do, it could be talking to your parents, something small like that, or writing poetry, or there are so many avenues. I just happen to be very, very loud and unapologetic. That's my strength. And so, I guess you can call that brave, but I'm just kind of like, oh no, I'm just like super, super obnoxious. So I'm going to be really, really obnoxious about injustice. How about that? And some people, their thing is like, okay, well, I'm going to donate. I have a lot of funds, or I have a lot of connections. And so it's really about finding what it is that you are good at, finding what it is that you can contribute, and doing that. And that's brave.
Yeah.
What's brave is standing up against something that you maybe feel a little bit weird about and going, but I got to do something. You got that conviction. Use it. You have that to kind of propel you forward, because we're going to need as much help as we can get.
Well, Sky, I must say, on behalf of, I think, a lot of people, that you are a prime example of what you just described. And I thank you so much for being here and sharing your voice. I know it can be difficult and taxing and hard to have these conversations over and over again. And I'm so thankful on behalf of our organization that you've lended your voice to this series and for being here. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a blast.
Thank you.